They might be sitting there with teenagers now and thinking, oh, damn, I've really stuffed up. There is hope and there is ways of working with young people. It's never too late to start. We start now. We start now that we know. And I think that forgiving ourselves for our parenting when our kids were young, if we miss things, we might have missed some of their language. You often talk about language of harm, child's language of harm, which is often nonverbal. It's often through behaviour. We might have missed some of that.
Welcome to Conversations with Kristi. I'm Kristi McVie, a former WA police officer, specialist child interviewer and child abuse detective. For years, I worked on the front lines investigating child sexual abuse, where I saw the risks, the patterns, and most importantly, the ways that we can protect our kids. Now I'm here to share that knowledge with you. This podcast is all about real conversations, giving parents, carers, and educators the tools to keep their kids safe, both in person and online. Through survivor stories, expert insights, and practical advice, we'll navigate these tough topics together so you feel informed, confident, and empowered. Because when we know better, we can do better, and our kids deserve nothing less. Content warning. Some topics and conversations can be triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised as your mental health is important. Please refer to my website and the show notes for available support services. Welcome back to Conversations with Kristi podcast. I am so excited to be talking to the wonderful Nikki Butler today. For anyone who listens to this podcast, you know that I find a lot of my guests through my LinkedIn connections, which is amazing because LinkedIn has actually provided me so many wonderful guests for my podcast, but also linked me up with so many like-minded individuals who are in the child safety and child protection space. And Nikki is one of those people, and I don't want to over-explain what Nikki does. I'm going to let Nikki do that in a minute. But thank you so much for being here, Nikki, and thanks for so much for putting your hand up to come on the podcast and talk about, well, I won't even tell everyone what you're going to talk about because that's going to ruin the surprise. So, Nikki, thank you for being here. And if you don't mind, starting off with who you are, what you do, and, how you got to where you are talking about what we're talking about today.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. It's really exciting to be here and, seeing where the conversational journey takes us this morning. So a little bit about me. I have quite a few hats actually, but I came into the space of working with children and teenagers and families when I was around about 20. And we're not going to talk about ages here, but I have spent quite a lot over 30 years now being dedicated to child protection, child safety and well-being. And so there's a lot of things that I've done in my background, set up programs for street kids. I've worked with after-school programs, camp holiday programs, and I moved into working with young mothers and pregnant teenagers for a number of years and then moved into the health context. I did social work degrees and, research along the way and all of that stuff. I often reflect and I think over 30 years ago, I became passionate about child protection and the passion just gets bigger and bigger and stronger. It just doesn't leave me. So I have decided and worked out that it is a calling. It's kind of part of what I'm here for.
I feel that deeply because it's similar to mine. I say to people, I can't sleep at night. I think about this all the time. I wake up thinking about it. Instead of being angry at whatever the universe or whatever for hounding me with this passion, I'm just going with it and just letting it take me wherever it takes me. So you sound exactly like I am.
Sometimes I think, do I just want to go and work in a garden centre? But, I think I'd be bored very, very quickly.
Yeah, I actually say that probably once a week. Oh, wouldn't it be easier if I just had a normal job? But no, it wouldn't because I'd still be hounded by the thoughts of everything that I know. So.
Yeah.
So Nikki, you've worked and done this work for such a long time and I'd imagine, for me personally, like when I look back and reflect on my own journey in this space, and I haven't been doing it as long as you, but I realized that what I knew at the beginning and what I know now are so different. Like I actually had a moment of reflection this morning actually where I thought, and look, hand on heart and, sharing some of the things that like, I just wish I had known what I know now back when I was first a police officer, because at times when I reflect on that journey very early on, I think, oh my gosh, I was so ignorant and so I had no idea and no understanding of what people are going through. And I came from a lens of, well, I can get, just get yourself together, or just pull yourself together, and just, why aren't you doing it? It's simple, like that ignorant stance. And part of it wasn't because of I believed that. It was because that's what is taught, like, just, I'm there to go and, help protect people. But it was not really, when I first went in, it was sort of like, this is what we do, policy, procedure, policy, procedure. There was no humanality to it. There was no, compassion to it. And so when you first join the police, you're just following policy and procedure without that human element. And then, a few years in, especially when I started interviewing children, I realized just how it's not as simple as we make it out, like they try and make you be. They want you to be a robot in there.
Yeah.
And you're actually dealing with people with trauma, with, and all of these other complexities. And as I went through that, and now I look back and I go, far out, man, like, I wish I knew more when I started. I could have done a better job back then. But I guess that's part of the learnings. I'm sure in the 30 years that you've been doing this, you probably started out with this idea of what things are. And then here you are 30 years later going, wow, like, I knew nothing. If a bit of a Game of Thrones reference, we know nothing, Jon Snow, like, we literally know nothing. And at the start, and then, and we still don't know as much as we
Yeah.
think we do now. That's a bit
Yeah.
of rambling there. So, Nikki, what I wanted to talk to you about today is, you worked with young mothers and with pregnant mums and stuff like that. And I'd imagine in that young mother space, especially, you would have seen young teenage people that were obviously dealing with their own traumas and their own, own issues that they probably didn't have anyone to really talk about. Like, let's dive into some of the stuff that you know about teens and all of this space of
Yeah.
needing people to be there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. You've just taken me instantly back to the years that I worked directly with teen mothers. And I did a whole research thesis on it. And I was pregnant at the same time with my second child, I got pregnant when my daughter was 17. And so I was working with young mothers. I was doing a research thesis and I had become pregnant. It was, yeah, all quite interesting. And you've taken me back to some of the stories. There were some incredibly sad stories. I will never, ever forget the young mother. She was about 13 or 14 years of age, and Child Protection Services would not let her keep her baby. There was no question. She had no choice because the father of her baby was her father. Now, this young girl had a whole history of harm and trauma, and now this was a baby that she loved, she absolutely loved. And I just remember it was heartbreaking. That's one of the stories that comes to mind. There were also some beautiful stories with really good outcomes. That was one of the sad ones, and one of the many stories why I am so passionate about um, teenagers being protected and safe from harm, and kind of having their own sense of agency and their own being able to kind of know ways they can keep themselves safe and communicate when things aren't okay for them as well. Yeah, so that's,
Mm.
yeah,
You've
one
just
of the
broken my
stories.
heart.
Yeah, my heart was broken a long time ago.
I've seen actually that same scenario. So I have seen that same scenario in my work. And what probably breaks my heart the most is that that young person would have been just so wanting to protect that little baby from what she had been through. Like, I can just envision what was going on for her and how hopeless and how heartbroken she would have been. That in itself is a massive trauma to her future. And
Yeah,
her future self is probably still dealing with that now. So
absolutely.
yeah, it's just so heartbreaking. Now, to get started in talking about this, before we pressed record, I mentioned how sometimes when we're parents, we think once our kids hit those teenage years, that kind of our job's done. Like, far out. We survived those younger years, and now they're teenagers. Yay. Like, and then of course our kids start pushing back. They start doing, like, they might start some risk-taking behavior. And what I have seen, and even my daughter makes the comment, she's 17 herself right now. She makes the comment all the time. She's like, Mum, parents are silly. Like, they just like stop parenting. And I'm like, I know, babe, but like, I think some parents think that they don't have to parent teens, or they don't know how to parent teens, and it gets harder. So they stop, or they just, give up. So let's talk about that. I think one of the things that I personally believe, is you actually need to be more involved with your teens. They need you more than they did when they were two.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be really difficult navigating that space because sometimes they don't really want you around much. You're not their favorite person in the world anymore. Their friends are, and they come back round to, but they can often go through a stage where they don't really want to hang out as much as they used to. So it can be quite hard for a parent to know how to navigate that and how to keep the lines of communication open, how to ensure that their teen knows that they are there for them. And so there comes that kind of balancing, like, am I too involved? Am I over involved? Because on one hand, it can feel like to the young person, oh, I'm not parented anymore. And on the other hand, you're going to have parents that become more strict and they try to really tighten the reins and they apply tough love. Um, and so you've kind of got two ends of the scale there, and finding that balance so that really parenting teenagers, it's a balance between keeping them safe, keeping communication open, allowing them some freedoms and the opportunities to grow and for self-expression and for working out problems themselves and all of that, because we can be so used to, as parents, fixing things, solving things. So it's really hard for parents to navigate that.
Yeah, I will admit, Hannah, again, here's an admission of truth. I really struggled with that because I went from having this little person who was like, I was her hero. She looked to me for every answer. Everything I said, she just believed. And then all of a sudden, as she shifted from that little person into that teenage person, she was now no longer believing what I said, or didn't like what I said, or she was pushing back on what I said and arguing things. And it was like a slap to the face, because I had this docile little human who was like, you're the best thing ever, Mum. And now I hate you, you're ruining my life. And,
Yeah,
and all of that struggle. And it was a real tough time for me, because I went from feeling like I had this parenting thing down pat to to really second guessing my parenting and who I was. And it pushed lots of buttons. It not only pushed buttons in me about my worth and who I was as a parent, but it pushed buttons in me as, what kind of parent am I if my child won't listen? What kind of parent am I if she's pushing back, and she's, all of these things, and all of these unwritten rules that we have around children, like they should be seen, they should be do what they're told, they need to listen,
yeah,
they need to be quiet. And because she'd had years of being, first of all, she was always given a voice. She was taught protective behaviors and body safety. She was taught about her own bodily autonomy, and she was taught about her own being. She's an individual, she's not a belonging, or I don't own her, or no one owns her. She's this own little person. And so when she got to teenage years, all of that was flipped on its back, like flipped over on
yeah,
me, and said, I have a voice. I'm allowed to say what I want. You don't get to tell me what, So for
yeah,
instance, so all of a sudden I'm like, oh, shit, like I've basically created a monster here. But it's not that at all. Like, it took me a little while to go, actually, this is what I wanted. This is really important, because if she's speaking up to me, an adult, in the big wide world, she's going to speak up for herself and have
yeah,
that, she's going to have that strength and courage to stand up for herself and to speak up when she's not going to be a pushover. She's not going to be taken advantage of. And,
yeah,
and so I actually did my job right in all
yeah,
of that.
absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I guess from the perspective of young people, Let's talk about, the fact is that our kids do need us more. Like they need us all the way through that, but the parenting journey changes and we need to change with it. How we support our kids. How can we support them through those phases? What advice do you have for parents in that?
Yeah. And it is, you reminded me about, I'm taking a little step back and I'll come back to your question, but I remember the last time I told my daughter to go to her room was when she was 13 because it was nighttime and she jumped out the window. She's just thought, right, that's it. I'm not staying here. So I never ever, use that as a consequence again. I spent the rest of the night driving around the streets trying to find her, which I did find her in the end. And she was with her friend and she'd, met up with her friend and all of that. But, yeah, having to kind of change the way that we do things. And yeah, so bring me back to your question. Sorry.
Oh, my question is like, what kind of, I guess, what do we need to know about the brain development in teens that all of a sudden they become this like little person that looks up to us with hearts in their eyes, and then all of a sudden they're hating us? What's happening in that developmental stages that changes that? And also, I guess, to remind parents that it's quite normal for our kids
Yes.
to push back.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take it back to, I know it's an old theory now, but it is still taught in universities, I'm told, that you go back to Erickson's model of or theory of development and you think and you look at the adolescent years and it's about identity confusion. And so it's a period of time where they're needing to work things out for themselves. Who actually am I? For all these years, mum's told me who I am, or dad's told me who I am, or I wear these clothes because mum loves them, and it's who am I? What do I want? What is my true gender? Who are the friends I want? Okay, mum doesn't like my friends, but I like them, and so working out what do I want to be? What do I want to do? And so there's, part of that developmental stage is pushing back. And I
Mm.
love the way that you reframed that. That's, they're meant to push back. They're meant to
Yes.
start standing up for themselves. They're meant to start knowing what they want and who they are and what they want to do. And so when we try to squash that, we're actually suppressing, part of their own development.
Mm.
And at the same time, we also still need to have boundaries. We still need to, we still need to be protective parents without being overprotective and without being underprotective.
Yeah, I was about to say that. I was about to add that. There's a fine line that you need to walk between, obviously, no, you will not do that. You will do what I tell you. And well, screw it. You just do whatever you want, because our kids still need boundaries. They still need us to be protective. They still need us to talk to them about stuff that we just can't put our hands up in the air. Because one of the biggest complaints from my daughter's friends that she shares with me is that mum doesn't care. She doesn't do anything, like, she doesn't care where I am, what I'm doing. And, at first that might seem like it's a really good thing for some teens, but eventually they're going to go, well, actually, does my
Yeah.
mum care or my dad care? Do they really care where I am or what I'm doing? Because it kind of has this vacuum when they feel like it might be what they want at first, but then it becomes a vacuum where they're like, or an echo chamber where they're like, oh, but no one cares about me. Because really, we're meant to still care about our kids, even in high school.
Yeah, that's right. And I can really resonate with that. I think about my own teenage years and in the space of working in child protection, I think for years and years working with, I set up a child protection program across, a extensive number of hospital and community services, worked with child safety and police and, led the development of a memorandum of understanding between the key players, all of that stuff. We didn't bring in our own experiences. For years, we had to put on our professional hat and wear that. And I've been thinking more and more around the real value in our own experiences and remembering back to when we were teenagers. Because
Yeah.
when we do that, it helps us come from a developmental perspective, empathetic perspective. And when we're thinking about the stage of development, we're thinking about trauma-informed principles, and we're bringing an empathetic lens to that, we can work so much more effectively with young people, and we can provide so much more effective advice and guidance for parents as well, for all the teen mums and dads out there and all the teen step mums and dads, and it's so, I
Yeah.
think back about with my own teenage years. I lived with dad when I was 13 to 15, and he was very strict. You come home at a certain time. 1 minute late, I'd be 1 minute, 1 week grounded. I was never, ever, ever 1 minute late, ever.
Yeah.
But what I did in that time that I was out, he never asked about.
Could have been
Things
stealing
happened
cars
to
or
me.
doing anything.
Well, that's right. And things happened to me. I had my own experiences in my teen years of sexual violence at different ages, different people, totally different contexts. And, you know, he would never, ever have known. He did not know. And all that mattered to him, or how it felt like, I think that, more mattered to him. But what it felt like is all that mattered was I was not 1 minute late. I obeyed the rules. Yet in that time of being out, all sorts of things were going on.
I think it's a sense of control. If you're doing what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it and you don't disobey me, I've got a controlled child, or like a good child. That good
Yeah,
versus bad, and it's a sense of control. My parents were very much the same. You do what and they had no idea I was going to this person's house and going to this party, or similar,
yeah,
same, almost the same. And I lived with my dad as well, but I had a stepmom. And, because I wasn't able to talk to them about it, or they never asked questions, and I lived in a small community. So I had to be sneaky. Otherwise, people would report back to my parents about what I was doing, or where they saw me, or who I was with,
yeah,
and even friendships. And this is the thing, like, I just think, and I wrote down here, as a parent, how do we support our kids in testing those boundaries and doing that stuff? Because there is things that they're going to try. They need to try it because they need to work out who they are, because if they're constantly wrapped up in a bubble, and I saw this all the time,
yeah,
right? Newly 18-year-olds going out and getting drunk and killing themselves in a car, or being punched at the pub, or
yeah,
going and sexually harming a woman because they didn't know what no was, because they hadn't had any experiences in being told no in their
yeah,
childhood, or all of the other things that happened, or just being, and excuse my French, but just being an absolute little fuckwit, because they just, all of a sudden, they get to that age and they think that they're invincible. And it's because we as parents didn't allow them to stuff up along the way, so that they got to
right,
that age. And I mean, I don't mean that with disrespect. I mean it like, honestly, these poor kids are like being set free at 18. Like, all of a sudden they have the brain development to be able to make these choices. It's crazy. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I was kicked out of home at 15. I bought my first home at 18. I was working like massive amounts of hours. I bought a house because I wanted stability, and I became like this little worker bee. And then, so I never really had those teenage years where I did the rebellious stage between 13 and 16, 13 and 15. And then I knuckled down. I was like, well, I've got to be an adult now. And I
yeah,
don't know about you, but I think sometimes if we don't allow them to make small mistakes and work it out, then they're not going to know who they are and where their boundaries are when they get to the actual big wide world.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, Dad's rules were so strict, and then other ways they were so loose. I won't even go into the looseness in this discussion. But at 15, I'm like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I went to mum's, and mum didn't have any rules. She had
Mm.
none. And so that's
There's always,
another
it
hole
happens a
that
lot,
leaves you, yeah, and that leaves you feeling, oh, so vulnerable, really. And because having some boundaries and some expectations are a good thing. So, and at 17, she, told me to pack my bags and leave, and I did. And then she wanted me back, but I'd found a boyfriend, and, and by 19, I bought a house too. I was also just had a
you're the same.
baby, and, and not a very good relationship. Um, yeah.
You're seeking out stability. I think the thing
Yeah,
to note,
absolutely.
in all of that, right, for other people is that because we had such unstable, like those really formative years were really unstable, and you were kind of pulled from pillar to post emotionally back and forth. If you don't have it in your home, that
Yeah,
stability, you're going to seek it out with the first person you find. And the
absolutely.
first person won't always be the best person, right? So you probably, let me just, and you don't have to confirm this, but I'm guessing you probably met someone who was a little bit older than you, and you settled down, and you thought, this is the person. This is the person who's going to make me feel loved, safe, and well and healthy, happy. And of course, that once that blinker comes off, it's not like that in the real world. Relationships take energy, time, and if there's a power imbalance between the age group, then it's always you're going to be the one who's not, that doesn't come out on top, right? Then add in another child, add in another baby, you're still a baby. And, you think that and we always think, I don't know about you, but I thought at 16, 17, I knew fucking everything. I thought I was so smart. I had such worldly views. I know nothing. Again, I know nothing about nothing. And I'm 44. I just turned 44 the other day. But at 18, 19, I thought I knew everything. I had a house. I was stable. I thought I could dominate the world. And, that's that, again, that brain development. It tricks you into believing you're invincible.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about this, is that we need to remember that if we don't set up our kids for success in those early years, they are going to stumble and fall and stumble and fall and stumble and fall for many years until they get to late adulthood, or like for a lot of men, it's around 35 to 40 before they actually
yeah.
find their feet.
Yeah. And if we have, and I think that's where I like to bring in a message of hope, because some people haven't known about how to teach kids protective behaviors and all of that kind of stuff when they're young. And now they might be sitting there with teenagers now and thinking, oh, damn, I've really stuffed up.
I've
I
stuffed up.
haven't done
Yeah.
all the things. There is hope, and there is ways of working with young people. It's never too late to start. We start now. We start now that we know. And I think that forgiving ourselves for our parenting when our kids were young, if we miss things, we might have missed some of their language, like I often talk about language of harm, a child's language of harm, which is often nonverbal. It's often through behavior. We might have missed some of that. Now that we are teen parents, I'm not a teen parent anymore. My youngest is nearly 22. Sometimes I think he's 22 going on 2. I'm sure there's people that can relate to that.
Yes.
And yeah, and so, I lost my train of thought. I started to go
We were
down
talking
another
about,
track.
well, no, you were talking about the language of harm, but you were also talking about you can start it from anywhere. Like, don't think that because you
Yeah,
missed it in the early years that you can't. And I say the same thing. You didn't know what you didn't know back then, but you know better now. So let's fix it, like repair that,
yeah,
and do your best where you're at. So what
yeah,
are some of the things that they can do to repair or to start where they're at?
yeah. And I think there's 2 ways to look at it. There's one way is, what do parents need to do? What can they do? And what do teenagers need? And those 2 things need to kind of meet in the middle. They need to align. If we look at what parents can do, it's keeping communication open. That's so important. Even when it seems like your teens don't want to talk to you, they just want to be in their room on their phone or whatever, or out with their friends, to keep communication open. Find some ways to communicate. Oh, how about we go and have, lunch at your favorite sushi place? Just finding some ways to keep communication open. Do you want to invite your friends over this weekend? Maybe we could have a barbecue. But there's lots of ways we can keep communication open without having to sit there and have a serious conversation about, things that might be going on. But being there and finding those moments that build connection, strengthen connection, that give the message, you are valued. I love you. I care about you. I want to hang out with you sometimes, and I'm always here for you if you need it. And some of those messages are through we don't have to keep saying that. It's how we show up and
Yeah.
how we notice when something might not be okay, and just checking in. Hey, I noticed that you seem to be a bit off today, or, is everything okay? And I think back to the, are you okay day?
Mm.
That's not a day. That's,
It's an
you know,
everyday.
checking in, especially when we think something's not quite okay.
I think, like, if I just add my little bit to this, I don't think that the conversations when things are like obviously happening are the most important. I think the actual important conversations are in between. So, like you said,
Yeah,
having a barbecue with your child and their friends, or inviting them to go to lunch, just the two of you, or just I don't know. Like for me and my daughter, sometimes I'll ask her to like do my eyebrows because she loves doing that. I mean, she's a teen, right? Can you do my eyebrows for me? And while she's there busy doing my eyebrows and my eyes are closed and she's plucking away, the great visual. I'll be like, so what's happening with your friends? Like, how's everyone going? Everyone
yeah,
okay? Like, checking in with her, how are you feeling? Like, and because she's busy doing something in that moment and she's not actually like under the interrogation,
yeah,
she actually opens up, right? And other times that I've actually connected is when I've like been feeling like a failure, or I've completely screwed this parenting gig up. Then one of the times that I realized that I was like, I had it in my head that I just didn't want her to be traumatized. Like I have all of this childhood trauma, and I was like, I don't want to ever traumatize my child. And so I was constantly like thinking about trauma in that way. And then I had this realization that actually I can't prevent that. I
right.
can't prevent, like, just because I think that my trauma is like trauma is a certain thing. Can be anything to anyone in any
Yeah,
way. It's not
absolutely.
trauma isn't what you think, it's what your body feels. There's like a whole thing to it, right? And so I was like, oh my gosh, it doesn't matter what I do, she's going to find something that she's going to need therapy on that I did.
Yeah,
I was too protective or not protective enough, or I swore at her at one stage when I was losing my shit, or, like whatever it is. And so I had like this little bit of a cry about it. And then I just basically went to her and said, can I just share something with you that I'm feeling right now?
I love
I
that.
feel like I'm failing. I just said, I feel like I'm failing you. And, I opened up to her about, how I was feeling as a parent, and got really vulnerable with her. And, every time I do that with her, she basically, she's the most beautiful human, and all our kids are like, they all have their moments of beautifulness. But she was like, it's okay, mum. You've given me all the tools I need. You keep
Right.
showing me what I need to do. I know you're always there, so it's going to be okay. And I'm like, I meant to be saying that to you. And she, but this is the thing. I think we need to let our kids see that side of us, that fear that
Yeah,
we're stuffing up, all of the things.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's part of, because the other thing that's really important for parents to do is to be a really good role model. And that's modeling, being honest and open about how you're feeling. And you're human too, and then that gives her permission to be human back. And other times you might say, oh, can I just talk with you about something?
And she
Because
does. She does.
yeah, yeah. Like we're not going to get it right all the time as parents. And we also can't beat ourselves up.
Well, we do, and we try really hard not to. I always say to my child, but also like other parents, like, no one gave us a book, right? There's no book, there's no guide. You literally come into parenting from all of what your parents did, and all of what social media is telling us to do. I said,
Yeah.
and yet your child will throw a spanner in the works and give you a completely different freaking reaction, and you're like, what do I do here now? So
Yeah.
it's not something that we can predict, and you can't strong arm your way through parenting, because it doesn't work. Your kids will
Right.
throw that out. Your dad had this idea that
Throw that one
my
out the
dad
window.
had the same idea. Yeah, and yet we were off doing things. So you're right. Like, communication is key. You know,
Yeah.
doing
And
all of that.
also linked with that is valuing their voice and respecting no matter what they are feeling or saying or expressing, that you show them respect and value for what it is they are experiencing. Because when we come and try and suppress that, try and control that, try to tell them how they should be behaving instead, we can we're not really supporting their own self-expression and their own development. Of course, there's things that we might need to steer in a better direction, but valuing what it is they are really communicating. And that's when, if we go back to language of harm, we are valuing what the child is communicating, even if, one, we didn't expect to hear it. Two, we don't agree with it. Three, it triggers us and takes us back to some memory that they don't even know about, and if we can kind of put that aside and be present and listen to what it is they are really communicating, because what they might be, their behavior might be communicating something that words are too confusing for, or they don't feel safe, they don't know. And I think back to a time where the worst day of my life happened. The worst day of my life. I was 17 years of age. A few days later, because I was in an absolute state, filled with fear, all of this stuff. I couldn't walk down the street by myself. I was so afraid that something bad would happen to me. And I told my mum over the phone what had happened, and her reaction was, "This is what I'm talking about, Nikki." And then she went on to blame me. And we never, ever spoke about it again. Now, I don't have any bad feelings towards my mum for that, because I know that it triggered something in her, because I know part of her story. Yeah, I've gone down a bit of a side street.
No, but what you just told me, what you just said is very common, where
Yeah.
it's very common for a young person, especially that almost adult age group. It's almost like and I have this conversation with my husband all the time about our daughter, where he thinks that she should be acting like she's an adult, and yet she's still a child. Even when she is 18, she will still have that same. It's not like you turn 18 and all of a sudden you get a new upgrade in your brain. It's a developmental. It takes time. It's like building blocks that take time to build. And
Yeah.
he seems to think that she should have like full cognitive thoughts and functions. And I always laugh because we've been together so long. We were together at 15, and I say, mate, when you were 17, you're an idiot, and you're thinking your daughter should be doing this XYZ. Freaking pull your head back in and remember what you were doing at 17.
Yeah.
And stop freaking making her feel bad for not having it all together yet. And I think from a adult and from an expert perspective, or from a professional perspective, we need to stop expecting and start listening and talking.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, start listening and truly listening. Listening without blame, without bringing in shame, and without judgment. And that's really hard to do as a parent, especially when in the earlier childhood years, you are there to tell them more about what to do, when to get dressed, what time this is what we're having for dinner, that thing. And then to kind of, yeah, put all that aside and listen. There's that whole
Think
thing
if
on going around, we listen and we don't judge, just sort of.
I know there's that whole thing, but guess what? We do judge sometimes inside our own brains. We just don't
Yeah.
let it come out of our mouths. But one of the
Yes.
things that I think would help, I don't know, you give me your opinion on this. One of the things that helps me slow down and maybe not judge so quickly, or maybe not always, but is to be curious as to why.
Yeah.
I
Love that.
always say, why do you think like that? What is driving you to want to do that? What is the reason for that? And I have like
Yeah.
these like little sentences that I throw out there. It's like, okay, that's interesting. I always say, that's interesting, even if I think, oh, that's stupid.
Thinking, oh,
Yeah, I'm like, that's a dumb idea. But, oh, that's interesting. Why do you want to do that? Or where did you see that idea? Or what made you think of that? Like there's just a few things
yeah,
that I use as my go-to responses to encourage that critical thinking. Because deep down, I want to say that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. That is going to fail, whatever. Like that's my parents in my head wanting to spew out. But then I've trained myself to say, oh, that's interesting. What made you think of that? Or why do you want to do that instead? And, and that's what comes out of my mouth instead. Having those go-to, phrases or statements or questions, asking questions actually elicits more conversation. So instead of like talking
yes,
at our kids, asking them questions about because most of the time they haven't thought it all through. Like they haven't got
yeah,
it all. Oh yeah, okay, that's really cool. But yeah, what made you think of that idea? Like, where's that come
yeah.
from?
Yeah, I love that. I love bringing in that curiosity. I must say that I am guilty of saying, that's a really dumb idea. How do you think that,
Sometimes it is.
that's going to have a good outcome? So I am guilty of doing that. And, something I'm learning to not, you know, to not do and to kind of be curious about it. And my daughter now, who knows me quite well, she's a lot older, but she'll say, that's good psychology, Mum. Oh yeah, okay, I get this now. So they work it out. They work out our little tactics in the end.
Mm.
But, it is really
Well,
important to
because
be
then they start
curious.
using them themselves.
Yeah, that's right. And it does, but that curiosity is bringing in value, is saying, I'm interested in what meaning you give to that. Sometimes asking why can be confusing, and sometimes teenagers don't want to go to the why. It's like, sometimes it's a bit more of a surface level decision. It just might be, well, everyone's doing it. And so how we can kind of explore that a bit deeper and help them make meaning to something.
Mm.
What would what would that mean for you if you do make that decision? Like,
Mm.
what's in it for you? Like, what are you hoping to get from that? And exploring the meaning that they're making.
Yeah, and because and here's how it's played out in not just my daughter's lives, but other children and other teens that I've spoken to. Something simple as like sharing a nude, right? And and this is every parent is probably going to have, and you might not even know it yet, but it could be happening, right? And I would say to a young person who's had their nude shared, or like they've shared it and it's been exploited or whatever, I'd be like, you know what, it's okay. You haven't done anything wrong, because it's quite normal to want to explore that and to go there, and you thought that you were doing it with someone safe. But I'm just interested to know why. What were you going through, or what were you feeling at that moment?
Yeah,
Because when you know what you were feeling, when that comes up again, you might think twice the next time. So let's try and find out what you were feeling. And generally, good 90 something percent of the time, it's either I was lonely, I wanted them to like me, I wanted, and it was exciting, or there was some sort of dopamine response that they were chasing, but they didn't. And like you said before, a lot of the time teens and young people don't actually understand what they're feeling underneath that.
yeah,
But so when you explore that and you go, well, what were you feeling? And a lot of them times they'll go, oh, I don't know. And you're like, oh no, look, hey, completely shame-free zone here, like complete. But
yeah.
when we understand this, we know when to maybe think twice next time. Like if we just go and do things without thinking them through, this is what happens. Like you don't want to be in this situation again.
Yeah, and I love how your first response was, "It's okay." This is normal that you wanted to do that, or it's common. It's common, and because some young people, especially when they do share a photo and then it gets exploited, it gets sent around places, it gets put up on Snapchat, all of that, and it happens to boys and girls.
And girls
It's not just boys doing it to girls. It happens the other way around as well.
all the time.
And that can feel so devastating. And, you know, those are the kind of things that can lead to some really detrimental outcomes for young people. And so that it's okay, it's okay. We can work through we can do what we can to stop it from going anywhere else, and kind of normalizing it. It is common, and there's some things that we can do moving forward.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously, we want that image to stop being shared. We want them to, it to not go further. We don't want it to be exploited any further, etc. But sometimes that's out of our control. So
That's right.
all we can do
Yeah.
is really protect their space and their peace, and help them understand. You're
Yeah.
not alone here. You're not the only one. It's not just you.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. And I think as parents, we sometimes go into panic mode and we think, oh my gosh, why would they do that? We've talked about
Yeah.
this. They know this. You know what? As a teenager, I knew things that I shouldn't have done, and I still did them
Yeah.
anyway, because that's what teenagers do.
Yeah. The
Like,
it's a
let's not
risk-taking
act like our kids
age
know
at the
better.
moment. Yeah.
That's what teenagers do. They're just like that.
That's right. It is about risk-taking and discovering, what you like, what you don't, who you are, being your own independent person, not what your parents have told you need to be and who you
Yeah.
are. Yeah. And normalizing those things. Even like, do you know what? Millions of people have that same body part as you. It's okay. We can, about exploring that, what led to that. And
I'd love to explore a little bit more about those behaviors, those behaviors that teens might be doing, or those risk-taking behaviors, or whatever it is that it looks like. I'd like to just touch on that before we
yeah,
finish, about, what to watch out for if what your teen is doing, or if they're doing something new that might just indicate that something's going on, bubbling under the surface, or has happened.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, the number one thing there's a couple of number one things. One of them is to really be listening, like listening with your ears and your eyes, observing behaviors, not becoming stalkerish or anything, but, just keeping your kind of listening ears on. Also, I lost my key thought. I've done that a bit today.
It's okay. It
The other
happens.
thing is, we know our kids really well. And it's when we see a change in how they normally are, a change in their normal functioning. They used to love going out. They were bubbly. Now they don't want to go anywhere. They're quiet. They're withdrawn. And some kids are more passive. Some kids are, quieter than others. But if you know that your teenager has until this moment been a chatty, bubbly, extroverted, lively kid, and it's more like a sudden change. It's not like a gradual change when we think about puberty and, hormonal things and all of that side of things. But there's a sudden change in the way that they're showing up. The way that they're showing up around, maybe the way they're talking about their friends, the way they're being at home. Maybe they don't want to, they've become disinterested in school. And so we're looking at that change in functioning, a change from who they usually are. And that's an indication that something isn't okay for them. And it may or may not be about something, that's, harmful. It might not be somebody's done something to them what's harmful, but something is going on for them. Um, yeah. So hearing what they're saying, noticing their behaviors, they might suddenly not want to go to certain places that they used to love going. So now suddenly they don't want to go and visit Auntie so-and-so. Now they don't, they might have had a bit of a boyfriend, and suddenly, they seem a bit sad or depressed or withdrawn. They don't want to talk about him anymore. It might be through their artwork. You might start to notice some things that they're drawing and scribbling on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of research has been done around kids' drawings and how you can notice that harm has occurred within those drawings. Suddenly their drawings have big, sharp teeth. And you got to think about what's in at the moment, what's the craze. They might be into a favorite game, like some kids love gaming. It might be connected to that, but noticing. It might be the music they're listening to. And I
Yeah.
can think back about teenagers, that I would notice when something's not okay by the type of music. Suddenly the music's dark. Suddenly all the lyrics are about really dark stuff. But last week they loved the country music, or, and
Music.
so what they're listening to can be an indication of what they're feeling on the inside, because they'll be connecting with the lyrics, connecting with the words, connecting with the type of sound.
That's a big one, actually. I saw that in
Yeah,
my own daughter when she was going through stuff. The lyrics that she listened to in certain phases really
yeah,
told a story about how she was internally feeling. That is such a massive thing, actually. And for
yeah,
for most of us, we'll listen to the music that connects and resonates with us. So that's not
absolutely.
something that I've actually considered before
Yeah,
or really connected. But yeah, that's a massive one. I think from my experience, yeah, music was a big one. I'm not a drawer, but I would also add to that just spending some time watching what your child's watching on TikTok or on
yeah,
Instagram or whatever, and seeing what accounts their algorithms throwing up, because their algorithms based on what they spend time on. And if they're spending time on dark themes that are about mental health or self-harm or whatever, and that's what keeps coming up in their algorithms, then that's
yeah,
probably a good indication that they're either having thoughts or there's something that's going on underneath all of it, because the
absolutely.
algorithm is a representation of what they're spending time on, and it just
Yeah,
gives them more and more of it.
yeah, absolutely. And the other area that's important in terms of really hearing and listening to what's going on for your teenagers is, what might their friends be saying? And if you're not hanging out, if you're not inviting their friends over, if you're not
Mm.
offering to take, your teenager and their best friend somewhere occasionally, then you're not building the connections with their friends. Teenagers, so when children are young, if something happens to them, the person they are most likely to tell is their mum or their primary carer or their daycare teacher, or their teacher. And as they start to get older, they're more likely to tell their friends. And I've had, when I worked in complex case management, I've had referrals come to me because a young person has disclosed, a young person's friend has gone and disclosed what's happening to the young person.
Yes.
And
That happens a lot.
so that connection with their friends is really, really important for lots of different reasons.
Mm.
And the friends might, if you build trust with your teen and their friends, then their friends might come and tell you stuff too. And some of that stuff uh, your teenager might be connected with,
Yes.
or
Well,
might
it
be at
always
risk
is
of.
anyway. It's
And
always It is. There's always a connection between what their friends are doing and what your teen's doing. They're not an
yeah,
island. They're not isolated. So they're either being dragged into it with it, or they're being affected secondary. There's a secondary, infection, I was about to say, but they're secondarily affected by it because they're the ones trying to support their friends going through something. So they're actually being
yeah,
affected as well. So, I
absolutely.
always said to my daughter, there's things that young people can handle, and then there's always a line in the sand that is an adult problem that adults need to help you with. So it's like, let's keep an eye on things. Yeah, you can handle it to a point, but then mum's going to have to step in and help, because this is an adult problem now.
Yeah. And get to know, where possible, get to know the friend's parents,
Yeah, if you can.
because that can give you lots of clues as to what might be going on in that friend. And I think, back to the different things that happened in my teenage years, my parents don't know who any of those people are. They didn't know what happened, and they didn't know who the people are, or who the person was in each of those incidents. Whereas for younger people, if something does happen to them, we know that 90% of when it comes to like child sexual abuse, 90% of offenders are known to the family. When it comes to adolescents, often parents don't know the person.
Or they don't know the person, but the child knows the person because the
That's right.
child's
And their friend,
interacting with them. Yeah,
their
exactly.
friends can often know the person.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's probably one of the bigger ones. And I just, while you were talking, I was realizing that I had basically in this last 12 months lost connection with those friends because my daughter's friends keep changing as she keeps aging. You know, she's going
Yeah.
through year 12 now. And so I've kind of lost track of who's her friends and they don't come over anymore. And they don't, you know, we were always the house that everyone came to. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden she's got her own license. So she's just off doing her thing. And I realized, wow, I really need to like probably, and it's not that it's a necessary need because my daughter does still talk to me about her friends and what's happening. You know, we've got that connection. But, you know, what if those people need someone to talk to
That's
or a
right.
safe place? And I've always felt, you know, prided myself on being that for young people. So I probably
Yeah.
like dropped the ball a little bit there. You just reminded me. No, I mean, look, it happens how it happens, and we do our
Yeah.
best when we can and where we can. I think the thing is that you've just pointed out so many good things, like, you know, pay attention, like just get to know your child. You know them the best, really. You might feel like you don't in those teenage years, but you know the heart of your kids.
Yeah.
You know who they are as a person, and you know when things aren't that don't feel right or seem right. And silence doesn't help in these cases. You know,
No.
it's not about attacking them and going, "What the hell's going on? Why are you acting like this?" It's about doing it really subtly and I use this term all the time, like coming in through the side door and like just, you know, sneaking in and you know, stealthing it into their world because sometimes if you try and do the front door entrance where you're going, what's going on? They're
Yeah.
going to shut down because they're worried that you're going to overreact or they're not sure yet or whatever. If you come in through the side door, which is through friends, peers, you know, talking about your own experiences, you know, all that vulnerability stuff, then they're kind of going to be taken unawares and they're going to feel safe to share. And then you kind of patching those holes up anyway. So you lock
Yeah.
that door as well. Um, yeah, I think that's a good reminder for everyone and just yeah, you've done amazing in explaining all of this, Nikki. And I think, you know, as a parent, I have struggled with some of this, but as I've learned more, I've done more and I've gone back and repaired and I've gone back and shared
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it does work, guys. It does work. Like, don't think that you can get to teenage years and think, oh well, there's no hope now. I've lost them. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. There's always help. We start from where we are now because that's all we actually have is
exactly.
now. And yeah,
Well,
is
and
where we start.
I will say this. I know I can respect you for when you said I don't blame my mum because that's who, like, where she was at. Because I've actually had conversations as an adult with my parents about how my childhood was, and although they didn't, you know, sit there and go, "I'm so sorry, I did this to you," because I came from a space of, look, I didn't like, I know my side of the story. I'd just love to hear yours. And I came from that space and where I was like, you know,
Bless you.
I just want to understand your side of the story because I know what I went through and what I feel. You know, I'd love to know what you felt and what you were going through. And
Yeah.
when I
I
did
love that.
that, well, yeah, I don't know how I come up with these things, but they just come out of my mouth. But, you know, when I did that to both my parents, they kind of like, and then, you know, shared, and I was able to get a better understanding. Therefore, I was able to accept that they didn't actually really know what they were doing. They didn't have control over it. They had all of their own traumas up behind it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they didn't do anything on purpose. They weren't mean and horrible, nasty people. Otherwise, I wouldn't have anything to do with them today.
Yeah. Yeah. They're doing their best at that time. You know, my parents were teenagers when they had me, you know,
How funny that you weren't much older.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I love that. I love how you've shared that. I haven't quite got to that space, but
Well, I had to do it. And I said this in some other interview the other day. I had to do it because I was writing about my own childhood in my first chapter of the book. And I was like, I wrote it down. And then I realized, like, oh, shit, if I'm going to print this, I'm going to have to talk to my parents and tell them what I've written.
yeah,
And, you know, it's a very, very the version in the book, because the book isn't about me, it's about my experiences and what I know about child sexual abuse and my experience as a detective. So it isn't about my childhood or my story, but I figured, people needed to know who I was. So I had to write about my childhood. And then when I was writing about my childhood, it made me second guess, or like I came from a different perspective. It's so interesting for anyone out there who's got
Yeah.
trauma. Write it down, write down your story and watch you just, because I don't know, maybe it was just where I was at in the journey, but I was able to see it from a different lens, like from looking down.
Yeah.
And when I looked down, I was like, huh, I don't think my parents did, like, yes, that was my experience, but I don't actually think they knew what they did it on purpose now. Like I saw it from such a different lens. And I highly recommend everyone, with any trauma you have, is to just really like take that time to write it out. It's
Yeah.
so cathartic and healing.
I agree with that. In 2023, I was a co-author in Voices of Impact, Volume 3, which became a bestseller. And that was the first time I shared and it was very mild, some of
Yeah.
my childhood experience and what led me into being so passionate about child protection. The day that got released into the big world, I just wanted to crawl under a rock.
I know.
It was just that feeling like, what have I done? Because I spent all these years as a professional with the professional hat on, and you don't talk about your own experiences. And I love how that has become so much more valued. And absolutely with you in that, writing it down. And it is a way of releasing it. And also, I come back to when we stay silent, the voices of many go unheard. And I'm finding my own voice in terms of my own adolescent and childhood experiences so that I can also unsilence others so that we can start to hear what young people might be trying to say.
Oh my gosh, that is the perfect thing to finish on. You just gave me chills, absolute chills, Nikki, because you're right. Every time we speak up, we allow someone else to find their voice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. That was the perfect ending. You
I
just
gave
brought in
myself
the gold
goosebumps.
at the end. You brought in the gold at the end. Thank you so much, Nikki. Now, I know that you have lots of hats on, but if anyone wants to connect with you or to find out more about what you do, where do they find you?
I do have a website, nikkibutler.com. .au. So
Perfect.
as simple as that. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
And I've got a few research articles that I've written around, not
perfect.
research articles that I've written about youth offending, and also the impact of parental addiction on
Mm,
children and young people. So very active on LinkedIn. Happy for anyone to message me. All my details are on my website. You can email me, you can phone me. Um,
amazing. I'll make sure I put the links in the show notes so that people can find you. So if they
yeah,
want to have
thank you.
a conversation, or they might want to have you come and talk or whatever. But thank you so much again. Thank you for giving up your time and just having a beautiful conversation with me about all of this, because I think every one of us, even people listening, have something to add into this space and to learn from. Even I learn every time I have these conversations. So thank you so much, Nikki.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really, an amazing conversation and lots of reflections for me to take into the day. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Education empowers children, strengthens parents, and most importantly, prevents abuse. That's why I do this work, and that's why you're here. So truly, thank you. If you'd like more support or resources, follow me on social media under Kristi McVie or Cape-AU, where you'll find all the links in the show notes. You can also grab a copy of my book, Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention at www.cape-au.com, where you'll find further resources and self-paced courses to help you in this journey of protecting your kids. If you found this episode valuable, please take a moment to leave a review or share it with someone important. Your support helps more parents and caregivers discover this important information and take action to keep kids safe. Check the show notes for extra links and support, And most importantly, thank you for showing up and taking action to protect your kids. See you next time.